Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. First of all, on behalf of Professor Muhammad Zafar Hashmi Kamsets and Professor Dr. Tasawwur Hayat, Secretary General, Pakistan Academy of Sciences, I welcome all the participants and the speakers on this third talk in the PS lecture series on climate change and environmental sciences. Today we have with us Professor Dr. Nabeel Khan Niazi. He will be talking about environmental sustainability for climate change, adaptation, and sustainable development goals. I would like to give a brief introductory of Dr. Nabeel Khan Niazi. Dr. Nabeel Khan Niazi is working as an associate professor at the Institute of Soil and Environmental Sciences, University of Agriculture, Faisalabad. Dr. Niazi did his PhD with high distinction in 2012 from the University of Sydney, Australia, in the environmental and soil chemistry. His current area of research is environmental and soil chemistry and hydrogeochemistry, with focus on arsenic in complex groundwater and soil settings. Dr. Niazi has two highly productive postdocs, first in the Southern Cross University, Australia, and the second postdoctoral fellowship from University of Bremen, Germany. Dr. Nabeel's research covers a broad spectrum of topics addressing problems related to water, soil, plant systems, impacting human and environmental health, food and water security, and ultimately socio-economic situations. Dr. Niazi has won 10 competitive grants from national and international funding agencies worth over 32 million Pak rupees, including highly prestigious grants from Grand Challenges Canada and International Foundation for Science Sweden. Dr. Niazi has produced 2 PhD and 26 MPhil research students, while 3 PhD and 13 MPhil students are in progress. He has authored numerous high-quality articles, over 133 articles with H-index 46, citations over 8,300, with a total impact factor of greater than 830 in highly impact science journals. In addition, he has also published 25 scholarly peer-reviewed book chapters in international publishers. In the year 2020, Professor Nabeel was recognized among 2% of globally productive and highly cited scientists in earth and environmental sciences. In 2021, he was awarded with highly cited researcher award by Clarivate Web of Science in the field of environment and ecology. His research has been spotted in research highlights groundwater arsenic of the Nature Reviews Earth and Environment. In addition, Dr. Niazi has developed a novel biomaterial-enabled arsenic filtration. Dr. Nabeel has been awarded with the nomination of a global member from Pakistan chapter by the UNESCO chair on groundwater arsenic within the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. He is also serving as editor of different international journals, such as International Journal of Phytoremediation, Frontiers in Environmental Science, Biochar, and as editorial board member of Groundwater for Sustainable Development, where he has also served as editor from year 2018 to year 2021. I now request Professor Niazi to give a talk about environmental sustainability for climate change, adaptation, and sustainable development goals. That's it, please.
First of all, I'm really humble, and I would like to say thank you to yourself and to Professor Hayat, as well as to Professor Hashmi and all your team at Pakistan Academy of Sciences to provide me this great opportunity to share my knowledge and my experience over the last 10 to 11 years that I have spent in teaching and in research. Thank you so much again. So without, I think, giving any more introduction, because sir, you have already done a lot of elaboration on my academics as well as on my research and some achievements. Thanks for that again. So the topic, as Dr. Saab said, that it's about environmental sustainability for climate change adaptation and sustainable development goals. So just a minute, I think I cannot move the slides. There is some issue. Just a minute. Yes, here we go. Sorry about that. So before going straight away, what is environmental sustainability? I think it is important. Actually, what are the key three pillars of sustainability? So if we look at this slide, we can see that sustainability, it depends upon environmental sustainability, and that is one of the major component of sustainability pillars, because environmentally directly affects the economic situations as well as the social situations and society's health. It means that if we are keeping our environment sustainable and safe, we can actually get our sustainability goals in the 2030 agenda of United Nations. So if we can see that ecosystem sustainability, actually, it can be associated with five major components. Number one, it is about sustainable utilization of soil and water resources. Secondly, our agricultural practices, are they regenerative agricultural practices? Number three, that how we can actually reduce waste production, or we can actually reutilize that waste as a valuable resource in different sectors. And number four, it's about contamination. How can we prevent from different contaminants, and what are the possible solutions? And ultimately, to give nature-based solutions and some climate resilient adaptation interventions and measures that will ultimately bring us toward provide solution and mitigate and adapt climate crisis. And ultimately, we will actually yield to achieve our goals. Those are actually 17 sustainable development goals set by the General Assembly of the United Nations. So as everybody knows that what is climate change? Climate change, it is a change in the pattern of weather and related changes in the oceans, land resources, and ice sheets, which are occurring over timescales of decades or longer. And as the past records show that global climate, it is sensitive to small but very persistent and continuous different kind of influences and impacts. It is a very interesting article published in Nature. It is a feature article, and it shows us that actually there are 9 planetary boundaries on the planet, if we talk about the planet Earth. And out of these 9 planetary boundaries, the chemical pollution, it is one of the important boundaries which humanity, for its own sake, ought not to transgress. And it should be actually considered equivalent or greater than the impact of climate change. Or we can say that both contamination of with different kind of chemicals and climate, they are interrelated to each other. So looking at variability on different climatic patterns, we can see that Earth's globally average surface temperature, it has risen and fallen by about 5 degrees Celsius in ice age cycles, and roughly every 100,000 years or so. And these changes temperature, they have actually also led to the changes in the other factors. For example, the major component is the CO2 concentration, which has increased over the last several years. And now they are touching or crossing somewhere around 400 ppm in the atmosphere. So likewise, globally, average near surface temperatures in the air, they have risen by around 0.8 degrees Celsius. And looking at this graph, we can see that the rate of warming, it increased in the mid-1970s, and each of the most recent 3 decades, there has been warmer than all the preceding decades since 1850. It means that the last 30 years, they have been showing us an abrupt change in the global temperature and also in the global CO2 emissions. Looking at the global vulnerability map, we can see that if we see the year 2050 projections, we can see that Pakistan, it stands somewhere at moderate vulnerability risk. And by year 2100, almost every country in the world, except few, they will be in an extreme vulnerability zone. It means that they are at the verge of climate risk, and we should take some kind of important mitigation and adaptation measures to make our environment sustainable and to meet the UN sustainable goals. And recently, German watchdog, they published a climate risk index report, and we can see that Pakistan, it stands somewhere around 100 or more than 100 at this risk index. It means that our country actually is facing a real world climate crisis, and we need to adopt some measures to save our soil, water, resources, and to decrease the air pollution issue. So the question is that how actually these various ecosystem variables, they are interlinked to climate change. So we know that various kind of natural and anthropogenic activities, they are actually having impact in the form of application of fertilizers and pesticides that we use to boost up our agriculture, livestock farming, which is a major producer of methane emissions, which is one of the important greenhouse gases. Then what happens actually? So due to the climate drifts, it can change the wind direction, it can change the events like temperature can go up or temperature can go down, or rainfall patterns can increase or rainfall can decrease. So ultimately what will happen, that all these contaminants, either they will be airborne, they will transfer from one place to the other, and they will damage the other ecosystems which were actually safe ecosystems, and or they will actually come to the soil. They can be a part of our food chain, or they can leach down under the high rainfall patterns to the groundwater or to the aquifers which are uncontaminated. So ultimately, they will actually affect the whole ecosystem sustainability. According to the 2006 Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Report, so we can define ecosystem services as the benefits which people get from our ecosystem. So we can divide into them 4 different categories. The number one, it is supporting ecosystem services. What are these? They could include nutrient cycling. Number 2, it's primary production sources. And number 3, the soil development processes. Second, it is provisioning. So provisioning means that what are the food production and safety scenarios? What are the raw material situations in the world? Genetic resources availability, water scarcity and water quality, and biogenic minerals. The third one, it is regulating. That is about pollination, that how it is affecting crop productivity, then carbon storage and climate regulation, waste decomposition and detoxification, purification of water and air, and pest and disease control. And the fourth one, it is about cultural services. So if we look into these important ecosystem services, we can actually see that soil, it plays an important and an underpinned role to perform these services. For example, nutrient cycling of different nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon. So they are related to soil. So if we are preserving our soil resources, we can actually provide safe and healthy food for the people in the world. And we can actually face the emerging challenges of these food security and food safety. Second one, it is flood mitigation through filtration or by growing plants, which will ultimately give us an option to reduce soil erosion and also to cope with the different climatic changes. Number 3, it is carbon dioxide sequestration, or we can say carbon storage and uptake of other greenhouse gases at the surface layer and organic layers of soil. And number 4 is contamination filter. So ultimately, all these climatic factors, they will affect the agricultural sustainability and agricultural production, which is an important and integral part of food security and food safety issue, as recently been declared by United Nations as well as by the FAO. In addition to these soil, I think groundwater, this is also an important component to discuss in climate changing scenarios, because groundwater, it is being depleted over time. There are 2 major issues with groundwater. The number 1, it is about groundwater abstraction, and number 2, it is groundwater quality. and both are closely linked to each other because when there are dry events due to the climate change, like low rainfall, and there is high abstraction of groundwater, it can actually change the underground sediment scenario, which can result in the contamination of some water resources or aquifers due to some geogenic chemicals. In addition to that, due to the sea level rise, the saline water, it can intrude, it can inundate the freshwater resources, and the lands which were usable, they will become unusable. So overall, we can say that climate change, it can impact groundwater by extreme climatic events, soil type, vegetation cover, discharge points, and different kinds of hydrological properties, like how the water flows, whether it is a downward flow or upward flow, or it's a transboundary flow. So, groundwater and soil, they both ultimately will affect the sustainability of crop production in agriculture. So like if the temperature is increasing and rainfall, it is decreasing, ultimately it will affect the planting season date, that planting season timings, the types of crops, harvest timing, and we will go to low yields. And in addition to these abiotic factors, it will also affect, it can increase the vulnerability of pest attack. It can change the pollination patterns of the plants. And these are those abiotic and biotic effects which can ultimately have social implications, like because all these components, they are ultimately affecting the human beings, our social life as well as our economic life, globally at a global scale as well as at a regional scale. If we talk about the soil erosion, so there are mixed messages with regard to soil erosion. For example, yes, we know that many studies say that due to the climate change, more drying events will happen, and it will increase the wind erosion, and that will actually remove the upper fertile layer of soil. But there are some other studies which don't say a clear message, like increased management and coupled with the varying temporal and spatial scales, it can actually result in new models that will more accurately reflect shifts in ecosystem characteristics. For example, we can see that in this slide, that in subarctic tundra, the climate change, it is having a net increase in soil development rather than in a decrease. So it means that there is an option, there are opportunities to debate on these topics globally as well as at the national scale. So if we summarize the impact of climate change and on ecosystem and agriculture, we can see that the crop revenues, they could actually fall by 90%, only in Africa by 2100, and up to 3.2 billion people, they can actually experience increased water scarcity by 2080, and up to 20 to 30% of species, they could be at risk of extinction if it increases in warming by only 1.5 to 2.5 degrees Celsius. However, it is important to remember that these expressions of risk, they are determined fundamentally by location in time and space, and they are not general at global or at national scale. In addition to soil erosion, agriculture, water problems, obviously climate change, it is also having an impact on the fate of different kinds of contaminants. For example, we can see that the extreme drought and wildfire events like bushfires in Australia, bushfires in the USA, in Spain, or any other natural fire events, they can actually result to transform the forms of some certain contaminants. For example, if we can see that natural wildfires, they can actually increase the chromium-3 to chromium-6 transformation by 35%. And chromium-6, it is highly toxic and it's carcinogenic. It means when it will be blown up with air, it can be inhaled or it can be transferred from one location to other location by traveling hundreds of kilometers from the source. Secondly, if we talk about the wet periods like high rainfalls, so wet periods can also actually, like floods and high precipitation, they will increase the bioavailability of these contaminants. And ultimately, when these bioavailable contaminants, they will come into our food chain, they can affect the animal health and they can affect the human health. Likewise, a sea level rise due to the climate change, they can have influence on the contamination of certain geogenically or anthropogenically present contaminants. For example, if we take the example of arsenic, so when the sea level will rise, what it will do, it will trigger the oxidized situations toward the reduced situation due to waterlogging. And under these waterlogged conditions or reduced conditions, arsenic concentration, especially in the coastal lands along USA, there are many such coastal lands in the USA and Australia, in many parts of Southeast Asia. So it is a major pathway of geogenic contaminants release into the ecosystem, which will affect the ultimately the life of the people who are living in those prone areas. Climate change, it can also affect the distribution and the magnitude of recharge, groundwater recharge actually. For example, if due to the high temperature and less rainfall, what will happen? The water table level, they will go down. Ultimately, it can reduce, it can create some kind of changes in the underground sediment conditions. Or if we talk about the opposite, if there are high rainfall patterns, like in the monsoon season, so they can actually increase the leaching problem of these contaminants. And with a chunk of soil which is moving, or with a chunk of water, bulk volume of water that is moving from one place to the other, it can actually cause different kinds of issues. For example, eutrophication, this is one of the biggest issues due to the nitrogen pollution. In many parts of the world, like in India, in Bangladesh, in some parts of eastern parts and southern parts of Pakistan, arsenic, it has been seen as a big issue. It is a geogenic contaminant. And its concentration in these areas, it has been increased over more than 10 parts per billion, which is the WHO's safe limit. Even in some areas, it is more than National Environmental Quality Standards guideline of Pakistan, that is 50 parts per billion. So what happens actually when climate change, it reduces the recharge rate, and when the rainwater, it seeps underground, it can actually create some kind of worse problem. It can increase arsenic concentration. Let's take an example of only West Bengal in India. Like in 1983, there were only 22 arsenic affected villages, but now they have increased more than 3,000. And it's not, I'm saying that only related to climate change, but there are many things which are impacting our ecosystem, and they are interlinked to different climate events. So why arsenic important in respect of these climatic changes situation? Because it can accumulate in our surface water, in groundwater, ultimately to soil, and then it comes to our food chain. And it can cause many kinds of cancer, many kinds of skin diseases, because it is considered as #1 class 1 human carcinogen. And then concentration of arsenic, it is in groundwater, it becomes more complex. It increases because when we pump groundwater for drinking, for industrial or for irrigation purpose, so generally speaking, it increases arsenic in the groundwater due to the increasing salinity, and ultimately it will come into soil, and that arsenic go to the crops like in vegetables, and particularly speaking, it is a big issue in rice grain, because when it comes to rice grain, it is a food for more than 3 billion of people in the world, especially in Asia. And it has also implications toward economics in the form of international trade, because arsenic contaminated rice, it is not allowed to trade to the other countries. So it will affect your foreign exchange as well. So climate change, it has a big impact on your socio-economic situation, on your GDP, on your foreign exchange in these scenarios. Opposite, if we talk about high rainfall, like in hurricanes or extreme monsoon season, it will ultimately lead to a greater aquifer recharge, changes in arsenic content of groundwater, and that has also implications, but we don't know whether recharge with that water, that we don't know the composition, whether it will increase arsenic or will decrease arsenic over time scale. So precipitation, when the rainfall or the precipitation, it decreases substantially, it also affects the recharge, and the water levels, they decrease, or its opposite can happen. So it means that it could have remediation implications, or it could not have remediation implications, because it depends on the composition of the recharge water. For example, in Recharge Pakistan program in Pakistan, WWF is working with the Ministry of Climate Change, and they are using some natural depression to collect that storm water, that is a storm wastewater, and without knowing the composition of those wastewater, which can contain nitrate, phosphate, some dissolved organic carbon, they are recharging the aquifers. And those aquifers, especially along the River Ravi floodplain, they contain arsenic. And we don't know yet that whether it will increase or decrease arsenic, because it all depends on the composition and of the recharged water. So if we take the example of Pakistan as an arsenic affected country, recently we published many papers on that, and one of our paper, it was highlighted in the Nature Reviews Earth and Environment's news. They selected it to publish in their research highlights, and we can see that mainly the River Ravi floodplain, then Chenab floodplain, and Satluj floodplain. They are actually dried rivers, almost dried rivers or seasonal rivers. And that's why arsenic concentration, it is increased along these floodplains. Along the Indus River, our data showed that comparatively, arsenic concentration was mostly in the permissible limit of WHO or Pakistan. So in addition to groundwater depletion and qualitative issues, there is another important problem of waste generation. Using the concept of circular utilization of waste into a valuable resource, we can actually mitigate and adapt to climate crisis. For example, the biomass waste from the crop residues like rice residues, maize residues, it is tragically burnt into the field, and there are laws. There are governing body, but still there is a lack of knowledge. People burn it, farmers burn it into the field. In addition to that, many industries, they use many kind of waste to burn and produce their local electricity there. Dumping of these solid waste into the landfill sites, it is also a big issue for the greenhouse gases emissions. So the solution is that we should think about transforming these solid waste products into valuable resources that can be used into the water filtration industries, into the health care products, or we can develop some kind of carbon-based slow release fertilizers, and we can also make our agriculture sustainable and more productive. For example, one of our last 2 or 3 papers, we can see that when we use biochar, 2 types of biochar, one was from the oak wood, one was from the perilla leaf, we can see that arsenic concentration, it was removed up to 100% in some of the groundwater samples which we collected from different parts of South Punjab. Likewise, we used some kind of sustainable and nature-based solution to develop a local filter which can work locally. The raw materials, they are available locally. These kind of innovations are cheap, and its patent is almost under processing, and it was spotted in many national and international media when we published this work. So I'm trying to say that we should go for these kind of local, indigenous, climate resilient, and cheap solutions rather than importing materials from overseas. That will actually have a negative effect on our foreign exchange, and also we will not be able to maintain that on a sustainable basis. In addition to that, there is a high scope to use some kind of climate friendly or environmental friendly materials for the remediation of soils and to reduce the transfer of certain toxic elements into crops, especially rice crop. For example, recently we used 8 kind of different organic and organic materials, and we can see that cow dung and sugarcane bagasse, these were the 2 important amendments that reduced grain arsenic content less than 0.2 milligram per kilogram, which is a safe limit set by FAO to consume rice. In addition to that, amendments, we can also go for the screening of virulent crop genotypes. For example, if we look at this data, we screened 18 different coarse and fine rice genotypes, and what we actually found that most of the fine genotypes, especially this basmati 370, kainat, and some other varieties, they accumulated less arsenic concentration compared to the many other varieties. It means that to cope with these kind of stresses, whether salinity stress or metal stress under these climate change scenarios, we should actually preserve our own national and local germ plans to develop new solutions and to adapt the climate crisis. Likewise, we recently evaluated the potential of different amendments, carbon-based amendments to check the soil health, as well as to immobilize the contamination of arsenic in soil in two types of soil. One was sandy clay loam, one was clay loam, which was collected from Punjab, Multan, and Lahore. So we can see when we added biochar, so it is a win-win approach. So until or unless that you are producing biochar on a sustainable basis without having a great impact on the atmosphere in the form of greenhouse gases emissions. So what we can see here, that biochar, it is actually giving us a high opportunity to reduce arsenic as well as to store carbon. And we can see that where we added biochar, the CO2 carbon emission over 30 to 40 days of time period, it was much lower compared to many other materials because it is highly stable and it can sustain for a long time into the soil in both types of soil. So it means that to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So this is known as sustainable development. And it entails that whether we are using the Earth's non-renewable resources on a sustainable way, like we are extracting minerals like phosphorus minerals or rare earth elements or many other products that we are making from the minerals. Whether our agriculture practices, they are regenerative, they are sustainable, the fertilizers that we are applying, they are posing more contamination issues or they are giving us higher yields. What are the alternatives? What are the hybrid approaches? How we are using our water resources, because groundwater, this is the sole freshwater resource that we use for our drinking, for irrigation, for domestic, for industrial development, whether it is sustainable or not, and what are the solutions we are thinking on. And contamination is a big issue of soil and water with different kind of organics, toxic metals, which are anthropogenic or which are geogenic. So whether we are developing some sustainable and some nature-based solutions to tackle these kind of issues, and ultimately it will actually give us some climate-friendly, climate-resilient solutions to cope up with all these kind of problems and maintain our ecosystem sustainable. So we can see that climate change, it is impacting all these 17 global goals which were set by the United Nations General Assembly in 2015, like no poverty, zero hunger, and if we preserve our ecosystem in a sustainable way, so we can actually compete and we can set our 2030 agenda in a very rational way and match all these 17 sustainable development goals of the United Nations. What kind of take-home message we can take from the background or from the discussion that I have done during my presentation? So policies and legal frameworks. So we have policies at international level, we have policies at national level, we have good framework, we have different laws. Unfortunately, there is a lack of enforcement. Unfortunately, there is a lack of communication between industry, government, and academics. Secondly, technologies which are available, whether they have been tried, like I was talking about Recharge Pakistan program, whether we know that recharge, that natural recharge, it will have consequences, especially along the river Ravi floodplain on the release of arsenic, or whether it will reduce arsenic. So we need to think in that way. Then technical capacity. What is our technical capacity to face technological changes? What is the capacity to promote public-private partnerships? This is a major part because everybody is trying to work in isolation, like academia, industry, and then government. So we don't have a good triangle which can match to each other, and we can listen to each other, and we can come to an important and sustainable solution to protect our country and to protect our environment. Then whether our actions are sustainable, then there is actually, I want to give here a suggestion that establishment of National Center of different excellences, like National Center of Excellence on arsenic can be developed, on groundwater problems can be developed, National Center of Excellence on biomass, bioenergy. There is one, I remember there is one in NUST, but what I'm trying to say here that there should be a coordination among all these national centers. There should be a coordination body which may be working under the government or under the Pakistan Academy of Sciences. So let's think out of the box. Out of the box, we should try new challenges, like we have known and unknowns, and let's think out of the blue. We should give surprises. There are some unknowns. We don't know about those things. We should try them. We should be honest with science, and we should use science to bridge to practice. And this is how we can resolve these issues. We can actually evolve, and we can take our country out of this climate crisis, and we can contribute toward the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals significantly. Let's reimagine, recreate, restore our planet, heal our planet. And this is one of, that we were the host, and this is under the UN's Decade for Ecosystem Restoration Program. So it means that climate change hazard, it's a cocktail of different problems, and we need no one solution. There is no silver bullet. We don't have a quick solution. We need some interdisciplinary and long-term strategy to cope with all these kind of problems. In the end, I would like to say thanks to my various collaborators, my funding bodies, who without them, actually, it's impossible to do research. And there are some of the recent papers from my group. You can also, and recently I contributed from Pakistan to in that UN's Global Soil Pollution Assessment Report with different team members from Australia and other countries. Likewise, I'm also trying to give some opportunities especially for the young faculty and for the students that try to submit some good quality papers into these journals where I'm working as an editorial board member or as an editor. And at the end, I would like to say thank you again to the organizers, to the Pakistan Academy of Sciences. And if you'd like to contact me, please send me an email. You can also follow me on our website and on ResearchGate or Google Scholar. Thank you so much again. Thank you so much. I'll be happy to have any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Nabeel Niazi, for your very impressive talk. I think this topic of environmental sustainability is very important with reference to climate change, adaptability, and sustainability development goals. The talk is now open for questions and comments. So please first introduce yourself while making a comment or asking a question. Any question or any comment? I have one, Dr. Sahab, I have one simple question. Would you a little bit elaborate how this watermelon helps in fixing the arsenic?
Thank you so much, Dr. Saab. Actually, it's not only watermelon, because this was one of the paper which was actually highlighted by a UK-based international media. And then, so we used actually watermelon. This was most effective. It has different kind of biopolymers and different kinds of functional groups on it. The problem was that how to make those functional groups and biopolymers available to interact with arsenic. So that was the biggest challenge. So what we did actually, we used a sulfur-based, very cheap quality, carbon-based chemical. We say that xanthation process. So xanthation means that we add thiol and sulfur groups into it, and you know that all the arsenic or cadmium or chromium, they all have a natural attraction for sulfur. Even when arsenic goes into our body, it actually replaces your sulfur groups into your DNA, and that's why it causes changes and it causes cancer. So we used all that background knowledge and concepts. We added those sulfur groups, and that sulfur actually attached with arsenic, and it increased several times arsenic removal ability. And secondly, we were facing a problem of coloration with raw material. So that xanthation it also fixed the problem of that coloration. So water was not actually creating some taste issues or some other coloration issues. I hope it's pretty clear. If not, please let me know.
I understand. Thank you.
No problem. My pleasure.
Any other question or comment, please? Well, Dr. Beena Shaheen Siddiqui Sahib, are you listening, Dr. Sahib? Do you have any question or comment?
Actually, yes, I am listening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Dr.
It was very interesting lecture of yours, and actually I have myself been involved in biopesticides research on neem, and I have done and I published a lot of papers on that. But the themes are stuck, as you said, that there is not a good triangle. Okay,
yes.
industry, and that is the main problem. So actually, several times there were possibilities of contacting some agreement. We could get registration from the government of Pakistan, because it is itself a very difficult, very difficult procedure. But ultimately we could get it. But unfortunately, this triangle is not very efficient. It's not working in our case too. So I think I will share this experience with yours, and you are doing a very wonderful job and very wonderful work, which has its applicability in real sense. So my congratulations to you, and
thank you.
We will end up with some successful stories. Inshallah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Any other question from participants? Zayan Ali or Naman, Amna Zulfikar? Any question or comment? No? Well, if there are no more questions, I thank all the participants, especially Professor Dr. Beena Shaheen from Karachi University. Dr. Sahaba is also fellow of the Pakistan Academy of Sciences. And I'm thankful to my fellow colleagues from Pakistan Academy of Sciences who are also participating in this lecture they're attending. So thank you, Dr. for a wonderful lecture. I hope.
Oh, thank you so much. It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
Yeah. So I hope you will contribute more in this lecture series.
Inshallah. Yeah. Inshallah, I will. And thank you so much. I would say a big thanks to all of you, sir, and to all the fellows and all the organizers of Pakistan Academy of Sciences. It was my very good experience actually to share my views or the research or science what we have been doing in Pakistan or what I have learned from overseas. So it was a great pleasure to share all these things at this biggest scientific platform in Pakistan, especially, and also it has a big recognition in overseas countries. So thanks for that again.
Okay, thank you, Dasab. Hope to see you again on this forum. Yeah. Thank you.
Inshallah.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.